Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is an Asus Eee PC X101CH netbook, and I just want to do a quick video review here. You can find more details at liliputing.com. It's thin and light, it's made of plastic, and it costs about $270, and I think it's a pretty good value for $270, as long as you don't expect it to do too much. First, let's just take a quick look at the hardware. We've got VGA, one USB port on this side, HDMI port. It does support high-definition video, the power jack, and a full-size SDHC card slot. On the other side, we've got another USB port, so there's a total of two USB 2.0 ports, combination microphone and headphone jack, and an Ethernet port, which actually, because of the size of the laptop, you need to sort of pull down to fit a full-size Ethernet jack in there, and a lock. On the bottom, we've got a single mono speaker. Even though it's a mono speaker instead of stereo, I think that the audio comes through pretty loud and clear for a netbook. I mean, I wouldn't expect brilliant audio, but it's one of the better sounding netbooks I've heard. And honestly, if we had two speakers, they're so close together that you'd barely be able to notice any sort of stereo effect anyway. Single battery available for this model. They don't offer a 6-cell battery option, just the 3-cell, and that keeps the price down and keeps the size down, but it's a 23 watt-hour battery, and it's kind of one of the big weak links in this particular netbook. I get around 3.5 hours battery life at best when I'm running this particular laptop. So it's not ideal in terms of overall battery life, but everything else seems to work reasonably well. One of the nicest things about this particular model is it has an Intel Atom N2600 dual-core processor, and it's not much faster for general performance, things like web browsing, editing documents, transcoding audio and video files. It's not much faster than the Atom chips that we've been seeing since 2008, but it does have a couple of bonus features, including support for high-definition video playback. I mentioned that HDMI port, and it actually supports 1080p local video, and I've been able to play some Flash video that's 720p and even 1080p without too much stuttering, even though Adobe Flash doesn't technically support it. Another thing that Asus does, which is kind of special here, is they include something called Instant On software, and that means that it resumes from sleep very quickly. Now, I've noticed that it doesn't work perfectly every single time, but most of the time when you open the lid, you come back from sleep within a second or two. Sometimes it takes more like 4 or 5 seconds. And that's something that normally I would expect from a much more expensive laptop. What it means is it's going into a special sleep mode here, and it can resume from sleep quickly. Actually, booting the computer clearly is going to take a little bit longer. But the ability to lift the lid and start working almost right away, it provides an almost tablet-like experience, something you might expect from an iPad or an Android tablet as opposed to a netbook. The difference, of course, is that this is running Windows 7 and supports Windows 7 applications. Pretty much anything you can do with a laptop, you can do with a netbook, but perhaps not as well. And when I say not as well, what I mean is when I'm surfing the web, for instance, using the Google Chrome web browser, 3 or 4 browser tabs open, not a problem. 5 or 6, it really starts to feel slow, and if I go beyond that, it's going to have problems. Multitasking, you know, running a couple of applications at the same time, as long as they're not huge CPU-intensive applications, works. But if you really want to be doing more CPU-intensive tasks like editing videos, it's really going to be a lot slower than most modern laptops. One thing that's nice is the Instant On. It actually connects to the internet almost as quickly as it turns on, or resumes from sleep anyway. So here we are online. Here we are loading websites. It's running Windows 7 Starter Edition. For some reason I seem to have 2 tabs open here. And, you know, so you've got your basic Windows web browsing experience. It's taking a moment for the page to load. Supports 2-finger gestures on the touchpad, so that's nice. The touchpad is kind of small, but works reasonably well. Like I said, 2-finger gestures, it's got a nice textured finish, and you can detect the edges because they're sort of recessed. It's down here below the side of the palm rest area. 1 large button below, left and right click options. And And you can see, for instance, that we've got a Windows Experience Index of 3.2, which is higher than you would get on most older netbooks, but still nowhere near the top scores available. Processor gets a 3.3, gaming graphics gets a 3.2, but the memory, the graphics, the primary hard disk, they all get reasonably good scores. Now, one problem is that you've only got 1 gigabyte of RAM on this computer, and you can't upgrade that because it's actually soldered to the motherboard. There's no slot to insert additional RAM, and if you look at the bottom of the laptop, there's no access panel, so you can't upgrade the hard drive easily either. You can remove a number of screws that are in here. There's 11 screws total. Sort of pry apart the case and get at the hard drive if you want to, but it's actually smaller than most 2.5-inch hard drives, which means that you're going to need to get a special hard drive to fit if you want to upgrade. This particular model comes with a 5400 RPM 320 gigabyte hard drive, but if you wanted a solid-state disk, that would probably improve performance to some degree. Another thing that's nice here is it's a matte display, which means that it doesn't reflect as much glare as a glossy screen, even in brightly lit situations. You can sort of see a little effect here of the sun. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for outdoor use, but in a brightly lit room, it's going to be a little bit easier to see than a glossy screen. The colors do sort of wash out when viewed from wide angles, but I feel like that's not as big a problem on laptops as it is on tablets, because you're more likely to stare at it dead on and not necessarily share it with people looking to your sides. The keyboard is reasonably comfortable. It's a little smaller than a full-size keyboard. It's probably around 90% or 92% the size of a full-size keyboard. I don't like how small the arrow keys are over here, especially considering you have to hit the function button plus the arrow keys to do page up, page down, home, and end functions, which I use fairly frequently. But for the most part, I found typing to be fairly comfortable. Asus put out another model called the X101 last year that ran MeeGo Linux, and there was another version, the X101H, I believe, which had a hard drive instead of a solid-state disk and ran Windows, and those actually had a smaller keyboard that was 5 rows of keys instead of 6 rows of keys. I found the keys all a little bit too small and uncomfortable to type on. This is much more what I'd expect from a standard netbook-sized keyboard, and fairly easy to use. And so, there you go, that's a quick overview. One thing I forgot to show you, which I have to grab from the side here, is that the power adapter is also very small. And what that means is this weighs only about 5 ounces, and so despite the fact that you only get about 3 hours of battery life from the netbook itself, the fact that the power adapter is so small and portable means that it's going to be easier to carry it with you if you need the additional capacity. So overall, thin, light, weighs about 2.2 pounds, 2.7 pounds, I guess, if you, or 2.5 pounds, basically, including the power adapter. Has the instant-on technology, support for HD video playback, pretty good value for $270. The downsides are that you don't get very good battery life. There's not really an option for an extended battery, at least not from Asus. Maybe somebody will come up with a third-party version. And upgrades are going to be difficult. So if you don't care that much about long battery life or upgrades, I think it would be hard to find a better value for $270 in a netbook space right now. But if you want something a little bit more powerful, then you might want to look elsewhere. One thing I did forget to mention earlier is it also has a fanless design, which means that it runs pretty quietly most of the time. The hard drive makes a little bit of noise. Again, if you upgraded to a solid-state disk, that might fix that, but you'd probably wind up voiding the warranty if you do that upgrade, because you have to disassemble the case and replace the components that came with it, so that's probably only going to be something that expert users want to try. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and a video review of the Asus Eee PC X101CH netbook.